Testing the live transcript.
Perfect. Can you hear me, Leora?
Hi, yes, I can hear you fine.
You can hear me? Yeah, perfect. It's better when the speaker is attached to the computer that we're talking.
Yeah, this is less echoey and
Yeah.
meta camera.
Yeah.
Hey guys.
Hey, David.
Leora, at some point in time today, or maybe tomorrow, I was hoping to come by today, but I don't know if it's gonna be time. I was gonna run by a kind of breakdown of who to have write the various donor letters. Just, man, it's really weird to see my face behind clay,
I know.
but speaking slightly behind the sink. Very, very Halloween. Like, I like that. Oh, ooh, ow, ow.
That's fine. I actually am taking off after the lecture. I have to go to a wedding.
Oh, nice. Then forget that. We'll talk about it tomorrow.
But okay, but I did send you guys the breakdown.
Saw it. So I just
Okay.
haven't had 2 seconds to do anything about it. So I got this. I was supposed to be on a lecture I'm sorry, a review with Alex this morning, but she canceled her lecture because she said their students were stuck in studio all night because of a lockdown or the live shooting lockdown. What was? I read about the shooting thing, but I didn't read about the lockdown thing.
I don't think there was a lockdown. I think any locking down was elective.
With the students, yeah, I think so too. Yeah, weird.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that.
Maybe it was a classic third year move.
Sounds suspicious.
Don't you think?
Hello.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
How are you?
Welcome.
Nice to meet you in the flesh.
You too.
There she is.
Kind of.
It's great to see. Thank you for doing this. Really looking forward to it.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm looking forward to it too. I just had a really nice chat with Stephen. Unfortunately, his power broke, so it was a final ending.
Classic.
Yeah, so, it sounds about right. Stuff happens. I didn't realize you studied at RMIT.
Yeah, I did.
Did you know was Susie Attawell there when you were there?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, she's fantastic.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've had a chance to go down there a couple times to do some presentations, and did something at MIT a couple of years or 3 or 4 years ago. But she's a great. She was at reviews too last fall here.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she was one of the professors there when I was there. And then I had a solo show at the National Gallery of Victoria, and RMIT were part of sponsoring the publication that came out. So yeah, Susie's, she's a huge support.
That's fantastic. I love that. Yeah, I really enjoyed, I've met her around different times, different conferences and things over the years, and
Oh, she's awesome.
talking to her. She's a provocative thinker.
Yeah.
I can see this work, her really loving your work too.
Yeah, it's been interesting, like leaving RMIT and now where I'm at now.
Yeah.
There's no real way I could have comprehended it or planned it. It's had a spirit of its own.
Yes, I bet. How is the teaching going?
Really good. Yeah. I'm doing a seminar this fall. And the question that we're asking is, could human consciousness be a scalable technology? So I'm always sure that the questions we ask don't really have any singular answer or have an answer at all. They just need to be impossible. Otherwise, they're not worth asking.
Right, for sure. For sure. And that's this fall, that's happening now?
Yeah, we just had midterm last week.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I really look forward to seeing the output from that.
Yeah, all the students are working in groups. I've got 19
Right.
students, and students are making props. So it's all through building that we're asking this question.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love how, I mean, that's one thing that I think about your work, you know, that you're asking the questions through the things themselves. It's
Yeah.
kind of direct, so not so much rhetoric. It's about doing. I really
Yeah.
like that.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to write that down. Questions through the things themselves. Well, yeah, I mentioned to Leora that I've really put together a presentation that shows this is how I do it.
Great.
And the reason I've done that is I've been at lectures previously and I find it not so interesting to watch what's already available online. I want to see like, how do you do it?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that.
Yeah. Open up the black box and let us see
Yeah.
how it's done. That's great. Well, we're right at time. And so, Leora, what do you think about, should we kick off or should we wait a couple minutes or?
Maybe give it 1 or 2 more minutes.
We'll wait a couple more minutes
for
then,
YouTube
yeah.
joiners.
Yeah, perfect. We're trying this new thing, Lucy, where we're kind of simulcasting in the school, and that's hence the screen behind.
All right.
To try to get people at least in a room. We're in a big gallery space in the School of Architecture now, so try to make a little bit of community reemerge here.
Yeah, wherever possible.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
I'll intro and then you can share. You can share anytime actually if you want. It's very quick introduction.
Thanks for asking me. Thanks for having me.
Oh yes, thanks for coming. Maybe next time we'll do it in person. We'll get Susie.
I would love that. I've never been.
Get Elena and Susie together. I'd like to see that. That would be
Oh yeah.
Clay, I think if you want to get started, you can go ahead.
Sounds good. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. This is the next to last lecture of the semester here at the School of Architecture. And we're really thrilled to welcome Lucy McRae to the SOA. Lucy is a British-born Australian artist and designer, currently serving as a visiting professor at SciArc in Los Angeles. She's worked with leading scientific and cultural organizations and institutions around the world, including MIT, Ars Electronica, NASA, TED, and the Cannes and Tribeca Film Festivals. She's also been recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. She's exhibited widely and internationally in venues such as the Venice Biennale for Architecture, the Milan Triennale, the Science Museum in London, the National Gallery of Victoria, and the Centre Pompidou. Blurring the boundaries across art, architecture, technology, and design, Lucy McRae has a finely tuned ability to imagine other ways of being, and crucially, other possibilities for how human biology might be augmented by a mixture of physical design, modification of genes, and even emotions. Lucy's intense exploration of the human body as a sensing, feeling, and interacting agent, which is constantly being confronted by new situations and subsumed into new interiorities, is perhaps an understandable culmination of her background, which includes classical ballet training and the study of interior design at RMIT in Melbourne. The writer William Gibson said, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." In examining the way science and technology is transforming the human body, Lucy's work describes her work as having a prophetic aesthetic, which challenges conventional understandings of how we relate to and exist in the world, creating nostalgia for a future about to happen. Fundamentally, Lucy McRae uses art and design, as well as craft and storytelling, as platforms and mechanisms to both challenge our assumptions and provoke contemplation about who and where we are in this contemporary moment. In the process, her work might also signal a shift to new ideologies and emerging ethics of interrelation and interaction between us, our technologies, and the wider world. As in all great science fiction, such recalibrations are exactly the critical preconditions needed to critically reflect where we came from, to situate us in the current moment, and to establish the narratives needed to project forward. Because we need new stories if we are to chart new courses and navigate the possibility space of where we're headed. Please join me in welcoming Lucy McRae to the School of Architecture.
Thanks, Clay. Hi, everyone. We're virtually, some of us physically together. I'm really excited about being invited to be part of this lecture. I wanted to talk mostly today about how I make the stuff. And the title of the talk is looking at how storytelling can be an act of survival. And I think what I've come to learn is that storytelling is an act of control, whether it's controlling politics, our purchasing behavior, the way that we choose our partners, our expectations of ourselves. It's really an act of control. And I've learned that through direct experience, through creating projects. For example, 10 years ago, I created an artistic provocation for a swallowable perfume, which is a tiny pill that you eat and you sweat a biologically enhanced fragrance. And this was just a video that I made and put out as an art concept, but people thought it was real. And so I was approached by pharmaceutical companies asking me to, give them the product in their country to be the first to produce this as an actual product. And so what I learned was, if you tell a story that hovers the imagination in a world that people want to believe, it can steer a technology and become real. And since then, I know that a very large global beauty company has set up an edible laboratory in cosmetics. So storytelling can control. For the last 10 years, I have been exploring membranes around the body. And the way that I work is either directly on the body or through small scale model making. Let's see if these are going to play. Okay, these are videos. This is also video anyway. And so they're very much about what happens if I put this on the body and I put water inside of there and then I do this. In the beginning, I have no concept of what is it going to be. And so this curiosity and exploration is also informed by emerging technologies around us. This was part of the World Economic Forum event trying on the exobionics. And so for me, I'm interested in how would this become something in the sports world, the fashion world, and how can we use these technologies that are used in health and medicine and rehabilitation in a world where they have not gone yet. So the way that I started looking at technology through an artistic lens was when I worked at Philips, the consumer electronics company, with their headquarters in Eindhoven. And we were a very small lab of people, fashion designer, product designer, tailor. I was coming from a background in interior design and architecture. And so we were kind of the misfits in the company. And we were trying to understand how new technologies would likely yield new business for Philips. So it was important that the projects that we were making were not science fiction, they were science fact. So this concept for an electronic tattoo was a patent that had been filed by Philips Research. And our department was essentially creating art to be used as a marketing and innovation tool to then ask the broader context, do we want this or not? And so this was really where I first started developing story through prototyping. So we would create these tests at Philips with the, very, very low tech ways of trying to understand, how would you make an electronic tattoo? What would it do? And how would that become a consumer electronics product for a company that had never worked in that area before? So really playful, and then understanding how that would work across different age groups. And so this electronic sensing jewelry, we were imagining would be able to monitor hydration, sleep, muscle movement, and what would that be like if it was a jewelry piece. And this was really a massive collaboration with very, very diverse backgrounds, and really taught me the expansiveness that comes from when you work with people who are completely outside of where you work, which has really informed the work that I do now. So before I know what I'm doing, there's like a question or an interest or something that's driving me. And this was a project called Make Your Maker that I developed in 2012 that looked at CRISPR technology. CRISPR technology, many of you probably know, is a technology that is almost like a pair of molecular scissors where you can go into DNA and cut out imperfect disease DNA that you want to remove and replace. And so it gives us the real potential to create superhumans, kind of devoid of imperfection, which is a terrifying concept. And so the idea of genetic engineering has continually informed my work, and also how I think about how that may develop brands. So this was a project that I did for Aesop, which is an Australian skincare brand, thinking about what would the future of beauty be like in 5 or 10 years' time? What would they be making in the future that they're not making now? And how can we use story as a way of imagining that world for them? So the first project that I wanted to kind of dive into in detail into how I make it is called the compression cradle. And this was a commission for Milan Triennale, and it was I made a proposal to make a machine that would function for 5 months on audiences every day, that would cradle the body with a tight fitting membrane. And I had never done this before. And so what happens on types of projects like this is everybody who comes in on the project needs to agree that through risk we innovate. And if everybody has that shared mentality of, we don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to try and work it out, that is really the only way that I've discovered that you can develop and forge new aesthetics that you haven't done before. So this is working with an incredible shop in Frogtown around the corner from my studio in Los Angeles called Machine Histories. And it is really very much hands-on, documenting different types of materials. And as this was an interactive artwork, what does it feel like when you compress the body with these? And what I tend to do, or what we tend to do, is we use every kind of machine possible. So whatever is around us is a way of us pushing the concept even further. What I realized was that for this to be an exhibition that would last for 5 months, we needed to move from a membrane that would tear to a membrane that was textile. And so there is that moment, and I'm sure all of you can relate to this, is where you're pushing forward on an idea, but you haven't resolved how it's going to work. And it's really an uncomfortable point. And that moment of doubt and frustration, I've learned to really cultivate and design with doubt and frustration, because that's generally the genesis of where you're birthing something that is about to tip forward into another world that pushes your project off into a new tangent. And this experiment here, with some duct tape and a cardboard box, was that moment of where we worked out, okay, how are we going to do this? So we scale it up, we make it the size of the body. And as we're doing it, we're also testing the shape of the membrane, the pressure of the membrane. Is this safe? So it's really, a very kind of exploratory way of making. And as Clay put it before, where the thing that we are making becomes the protagonist in this question. And so this was in 2019, this compression cradle. And we all know that in March 2020, we were sent home to our houses to have a good hard look at ourselves and kind of reach that moment of touch crisis. And this book is a prop. I don't know if you can see that. The Rise of Touch Crisis. It's a prop that I made for a project in 2019. And so it was very shocking for me, like everybody, to be told, we can't work outside of, we need to stay home, essentially. And so for me, I had been making these beds, these compression cradles, as a kind of antidote for a future where we will have this touch crisis. And then suddenly during the pandemic, my research became a reality, which was very shocking, because then I felt like, do I just have to reinvent what I make? Because now what I make is no longer in the future, it's now. And I was much more interested in near future scenarios. So that was a whole kind of experiment and self-reflection. And so this is what the exhibition looked like in Milan. It was an audience participation, so you could get underneath the compression cradle. And what we realized was we didn't think that audiences would want to put their head under, but a lot of people wanted to. And so when I got back from Milan, the way that I make the work is sometimes in scales. So the compression cradle was a large machine work, and coming back from there, I got a commission from Adobe to create a manual machine. And so then the scale of it became smaller than what I had done before, which it's like creativity is a marathon. If you run at the same speed the whole time, you're going to burn out. It's not sustainable. And so these projects by magic seem to come at different scales. And so then you can go back to the beginning and start this inquiry or this new way of experimenting with materials. Oops. And so this is the first prototype for a project that we made during the pandemic. So this was actually March 11, I think, and we were in California. We were sent home on March 13. And so this concept was continuing on from the compression cradle. It's called the solitary survival raft. And so now here I am in my front living room making these similar tests, and our entire pipeline was kind of, you know, turned on its head. And Uber became the way that we were shuffling all of these things around, and sketches were made. And up until this point, I hadn't worked in 3D modeling. All of the experiments that I had done were made by hand. And so because of the pandemic, I then moved into working in 3D modeling. And so what happened was we would create this 3D model, and then the model was unfolded into patterns for the textiles. And then they were taken to our custom soft goods person. And then she would make these cushions, she would send them to me, and then I would start to compose them all together. And I think what happened was that because everybody was having, and still are to a certain extent, their own vulnerable, emotional, self-reflective moments in their working, the curator said when she received the work that the work is both strong and vulnerable at the same time. And I think that is really a reflection of how everybody who was working on this project was feeling at the same time. So what I really enjoy is that the translation of how we were making and the moods that we were in has been translated into the final project, which is again a machine that uses a vacuum cleaner and a kid's blow up tool, a toy fan. And when you hug someone, when you have sex, when you breastfeed, you release the hormone oxytocin, which is a kind of intangible phenomena hormone that is said to build trust. And so this machine also inflated as well. And I was interested in, if we create these machines or these antidotes for a future of touch crisis, could we naturally trigger oxytocin and build this trust between ourselves or between others in a world where we have less physical contact? So now these two projects were running alongside each other. This is a project called Biometric Mirror Tech Temple, and this uses artificial intelligence developed by a computer researcher that I worked with in Australia at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Niels Wouters. And it interrogates what is called the Mackard mask. And the Mackard mask is what is considered biostatistically beautiful. And it was designed by a Hollywood plastic surgeon called, whatever his name is, Mackard. And to this day, it is still used to tuck and nip and measure the face. And the Mackard mask is based on a white female. There is no diversity to it. And so what this project was an opportunity was to physicalize concepts of artificial intelligence and create almost like a domestic, squishy, soft setting where we could ask who's designing these algorithms, and actually how true and real are they to the broader culture. And again, I think that the curves you can see here, like the curves in my window, you can't see the top of the window, start to become the curves in the exhibition design. I'm building the costumes in my bathroom, and And what you get is something that is quite dark and domestic. And so what happens is you stand in front of a ring light, which has an embedded webcam, and it uses facial recognition. So it takes a photo of your face and then compares the photo of your face to a whole database of traits. And so it can establish on a kind of moving scale your gender, your age, how weird you are, whether you're introvert, extrovert. So all of these things that, you know, we don't really, they're not clear to us. Like, am I an introvert? Sometimes. Am I an extrovert? Sometimes. But this is sort of psychoanalyzing you with an algorithm. And then once it's finished psychoanalyzing you, it then maps your face and turns it into this Maillard mask algorithm and creates this uncanny valley image of your face. And it's kind of been nicknamed the mean machine. It offended quite a few of the audiences. A lot of people came back to try it again because they found it entertaining. But really, for me, galleries and institutes are these platforms to ask these questions around how do we create accident and serendipity in something that is an algorithm, in something that is, built as an equation. And so moving on to the final project, which is still being exhibited at Venice Biennale in Italy. And it was originally the concept was to create an architectural sized hug. So it was a 6 meter long of scale compression that would fit within the theme of how will we live together, and that it was at the Architecture Biennale, so of a scale that I had never done before. For some reason these images aren't showing up. That's a shame. That's also a video. So again, back in my house, trying to work out a machine that talks to this idea of a post-CRISPR world. So here we are in a far near future where kids have been grown in a laboratory. Women are unburdened, to use Donna Haraway's words from Cyborg Manifesto. They're unburdened from being the vessel for pregnancy. And we have reached a point where we are able to mix biology in a laboratory and grow humans from scratch. And so if we are being grown as opposed to being born, how does that change touch, human connection? When we are born, touch is the first sense that is surfaced in the womb. I don't even know how you even describe that, developed perhaps. And so this is a speculation on being grown, we would develop very different dynamic and unfamiliar neurobiological quirks. And so in that world, would we need new kinds of domestic apparatus or machines, mental health props that help us come back to these ancestral traits that we have been lost by virtue of being grown? So this was a manual machine that uses roller skate wheels, almost like a dolly camera, and the body sits within these very spongy materials, using construction materials like tarpaulins or materials that are used in camping. So the project is called Heavy Duty Love. And in January, I decided to sew the machine myself. I hadn't bought a sewing machine before, but I discovered that I am a 4th generation sewer. So I taught myself how to sew. And what was interesting was that this was a very meditative practice that in a way, you take two materials, you put them together, and certainly they will join and become one, which was in high contrast to the world around us where everything was uncertain. So for me, it became kind of a way of processing how I felt about the pandemic. And so again, we created this 3D model. We unwrapped all of the textiles. The patterns were sent to me. I would compose them and then stuff them with these foam materials. And slowly but surely, the artwork became a sculpture and a structure within my house. And what's really important, and you can see throughout the presentation, is that before anything leaves the studio, it all gets documented, because you're never going to receive it back in the same way. And I think that when I'm teaching at SciArc, we make props from things that we find in our kitchen or our home. But it's important that the photography of that prop is considered the final output, because that's kind of what exists afterwards, and then what can be used to pitch for new projects with clients. What I've also discovered is that the making of the costumes is a really big part of what I do to hover the imagination and really build that post-CRISPR world. And so this now is being turned into a short film, and will feature 7 scenes. And this is the work exhibited at the Venice Biennale. And because of the pandemic and the nature of my work is immersive, it actually became a sculpture. So there's no human contact within the work, which is a new world that I've kind of stepped into, like statement sculpture as opposed to immersive installation. And the costumes were all wearable. So the cushions on here all had these tent poles that could become these costumes that you'll see in the short film. That's my presentation. What I wanted to end on is I guess it's a theory. In 2016, Harvard Business Review released an article about the 30 elements of value that a consumer would want to pay for in a product or a service. And so you see these 30 dots, and down the bottom, it's like, saves me money, saves risk. And as you move up this pyramid of dots, they get more emotional. And at the top of the pyramid, the thing that somebody wants to pay for is to self-transcend. And I found that really intriguing. And immediately I went to, the internet to really find out what is self-transcendence. And what I discovered is it's taking someone beyond the limitations of what one has set for themselves. And so if that is what people want in this world, it's a very intimidating brief. If I'm to sit down today, empty canvas, and say, I need to make something that is going to transcend someone, it's impossible. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to find all the things to procrastinate. And so what I've learned is that it's the state of mind that I'm in when I'm making, and to really harness that frustration or that doubt or that unknown as a way of making. And instead of writing about it, creating images of what you think it can be, to make it with your hands and trust in the magic of alchemy, that if you push something and transform a material as much as you can, at some point, you're going to forge a new aesthetic and you're going to tip over into a new world. And so that requires a lot of curiosity. It requires a lot of uncertainty. But I do feel like that developing our muscle to live in uncertain times is really how we need to move forward in terms of the rest of our lives. So I will leave it there, and I would really welcome any questions. Thank you so much for for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lucy, for that the wonderful talk. And I think, going beyond or into the projects deeper is such a rich territory, and I think it opens up a lot of ways for us to think about work within the School of Architecture and how students are kind of navigating these kind of deep, uncertain times.
Mm.
And maybe as a way of beginning, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and if you have questions, you can post them in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and we can discuss. But maybe I'll start as a way to kind of get things going. And so, and it's not so much a question. It's just that I'd like you to maybe expand on a little bit. That I was really struck by the way that you began with the problem-seeking quality of making things, rather than beginning with the problem that you solve through the introduction of making or the fabrication of objects or the design of something. That you start by making, and then the sort of problem or the question or even the questions kind of emerge from that making. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, because I find it to be so fascinating and interesting relative to how we tend to sort of compartmentalize thinking in the worlds of interior design and architecture, for example.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think sometimes, we all experience fear. Fear is a universal trait and emotion, and it comes up for me a lot when I'm starting a new project. And sometimes, almost to the point, it grips me where I say no to a project for fear of not being able to deliver something. And so I really have to check myself and check my reasons. Why am I saying yes or no to something? And I've always said to students, what you say no to really defines your path. It's much easier to say yes than it is to say no. And so that fear of not knowing what I'm going to deliver is really at the start of the making. And that gets overridden by talking to the wonderful collaborators and studio crew who I work with, but also getting materials in my hands and just starting somehow alleviates that emotion, that fear in my mind. And so I don't know what you call that, but it is a way of me being able to compartmentalize the thoughts and really let the material things predict what the project will be. Of course, you have sketches, you have ways of communicating with clients, because generally clients want to know what they're going to get. And so that is a way of deciding no for me. It's important that every stakeholder, whether it's a client, an intern, a collaborator, is on board with through risk we innovate. And so that's a really shared vision. And thankfully, especially for the compression cradle for Milan, the commissioners were on board with me not being able to say to you, it's going to look like this. This is what I want it to do. This is what time I need to deliver it. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet.
Wonderful. I mean, I think that's such a, I mean, I know that it gives students are like, there are a few students in here, they're like going, oh, I know this feeling of fear.
And I think we should talk about it, because everybody experiences it on different scales, and it's also outside of, the creative process. We're all humans, we all experience it. And I think by talking about it is one way of, giving it a stadium-sized space to just be there and then move through it.
Mm-hmm.
through
It's
making.
almost the act of acknowledging it is the thing that helps instrumentalize it rather than become an impediment, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Charlie, I see your hand is up.
Hello, thanks for the lecture. This is amazing.
Oh, hey, Charlie.
Thanks. I really like the the solitary survival raft. That project is such a cool concept, and I think it's totally valid, especially in our time right now. Since you work a lot with technology, I can't help to think about the fiction Brave New World, and I kind of wonder how your position in this ethical thing, the ethical sides of technology and human, because you also talk about like maybe in the future the part will work so well it can produce oxytocin and stuff like that. So what do you think if it in the future we really have this technology allow us to kind of create all these kind of stimulants to ourselves? Do you think in a way that make us a little bit less human? Like because in right now I can already see this happening, like not with technology but with dating apps. Like people use dating apps so much and they don't actually want to talk to each other. They just want to go back to the comfort zone behind the screen so they don't have to like take any risk. So what do you think about like in this topic about technology? And
Awesome. I love the way that your brain's working, and so many things going through my head right now. I'll start with this one. I was on an aeroplane going from LA to San Francisco. It was a small plane, and this one gentleman said to me, "I've CRISPR'd my kid." And I was like, "Pardon?" And he said, "Yeah, I've got a kid that used CRISPR technology. I decided his eye color, his height, his disposition to disease." And I could not believe it. And I noticed the dude sitting at the front of the plane shut his laptop and leaned forward. It was like, what the hell? And so then this gentleman with his laptop, it's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've been listening to your conversation." And he kind of opens up his book, his laptop, and he's like, "I've just quit Apple and I'm designing an app where you upload your sequence genome, you thumb through it like Instagram, you can upload the genome of a potential partner and compare how healthy and athletically prowess you have your kids." And I was just like, I couldn't believe it. And what I noticed is that science is determining and changing the way that we love, and he said in San Francisco, he's noticed this, who's now a friend of mine, Brett, that people are choosing to have partners who they love and partners who they breed with, who they have kids with. And so it's becoming like a subcontractual decision. And so there's that piece of the puzzle. And then the other piece of the puzzle is, future sensitive being. And I got a question yesterday from a woman who was at Venice, and her question was like, do you think that in this world, people will be sensitive to the future, or will they be sensitive as beings in the future? And so my role as an artist is to be an interpreter. I'm interpreting the fringes of culture and using my body as some kind of weird barometer, putting this stuff into my body and creating these outcomes or these provocations to ask questions. I'm not interested in problem solving. I'm not interested in saying, this is what it is. I'm saying, what if this happens? Do you want it? And so my answer to this woman on Instagram was like, in my opinion, I think it's both. I think we will be sensitive to the future, and I think we will be sensitive as beings because we have been grown rather than being born.
great, thank you.
I mean, that's an intense line. I mean, that's a very intense and an important question, though. I mean, I think it could go
100%.
that it's even the question, the more basic question of being made by technology in general since the beginning of humanity, right? The discoveries and developments and innovations that have occurred along the human evolutionary cycle that have allowed for humans to be made in some senses. And so I think it's a very provocative and interesting question. There was one question that came through the chat, Lucy, about your hugging machine. And if you knew of the work of Temple Grandin in her work with autism and the sort of prototyping also for early work in terms of developing that.
Yeah, I actually came across her work after I'd made a prototype when I was living in London with waste pipes and a vacuum cleaner, and then just discovered Temple Grandin and a whole BDSM culture of putting yourself in latex and sucking all the air out. And I think that's what happens in the ether, is that you're curious about something, you're developing it, and then you find somebody else who's been doing it like decades before you, hundreds of years or minutes or hours. And so, yeah, I think her work is, she's really used herself as a prototype.
Totally. I think that's what's also fascinating to me about that is that because of I don't know that much about autism, but the little I do know is that it requires you to not be, or it precludes you from being able to have physical contact in a way that a quote unquote regular person would. And I think that's a really interesting question relative to the one of being grown in the first place and having to artificially induce those feelings. It's maybe with the next question from Leora. Leora, do you want to do your question? Do you want me to read it? It goes.
Sure. Yeah, so I can just kind of read it and then expand maybe. So much of what you do focuses clearly on kind of the broader human experience and like looking at that collectively, but then strikes me that your process is this actually very personal thing. Your body is the one undergoing, these processes. You're the one feeling the physical effects, and then the documentation too focuses so much on your body and your face. And I was struck too by kind of a Cindy Sherman uncanniness in some of the images. And so I guess I'm wondering if you consider your work too to be a form of self-portraiture, and if so, if there are, precedents that you look at that have influenced you.
Interesting. I haven't looked at references of self-portraiture yet. I trained in French classical ballet for 14 years, so I have a history of using my body to express and to create shapes and to create imagery. But also I use it because it's like the material that I have all the time in front of me. It's always there. And I say to my students that I feel like the body is the hardest canvas to conquer for me. First of all, let's conquer getting over the thoughts. Sure, let's do that first. But to create works on the body, it's really challenging. And so, that's why I find using the lens of a camera to decide whether a prototype is successful or not, as opposed to looking at it through a mirror or just through the naked eye, helps me determine the success of a work. And maybe your comment about self-portraiture is that before the project leaves to go to an exhibition, it's documented and there's a body in there showing how it works. And that happens to be my body because it's around. So, but it's interesting that you see it through that way. And now as I'm making another short film, I haven't made one since 2015, and I'm casting more people in it. And whether, I move from being in the film to being behind the camera, is a question that I'm kind of rubbing up against, because it's difficult to do both.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point, because that didn't come to mind until you said at the end, when you were starting to use the photographs as the artifacts themselves. And then that does bring to bear on the idea about writing stories and how the work is disseminated beyond the physical object itself. And so I think it's a question that a lot of designers ask, but I think from your perspective, it seems like that's becoming so much even more intertwined and core to the practice.
Yeah, I think that's how it's archived, essentially, or is immortalized.
Right. I mean, and so many more people probably will see the work that way than they would in person, even in a venue like Venice, where you do have tens of thousands of people roll through there, but still.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important when students document their work and they spend time on art direction and photography, and how is that model or whatever you've made documented, because that's what lives on. That's what goes in the portfolio. That's what goes on social media. The emphasis in the seminars that I run is really on, photography and how would you make a film?
Fantastic. I mean, this comes up in studio quite often, and just in basic terms of architectural discourse, when you talk about putting scale figures into images or visualizations, instead of actually casting people to be in there, right? Like in art directing those images in a way that's beyond just documentation of a project. I think that's what this all points to in terms of the validity of that approach. Are there any questions? Any additional questions? David Heyman.
I just wanted to ask a kind of really stupid question. I loved your presentation, and I'm thrilled that you're teaching at Sire. And so we have a fairly kind of conventional practice-oriented school, and I think that especially last year, when with the kind of pandemic, there was this huge wave of depression to the school because everyone thought that their future was gone, and then of course it's been quite the opposite. Like all these firms are kind of flourishing. So like you could see like their response to any form of experimentation shrinking at that time. Like they were like shrinking. Any kind of hopes that they might have had were shrinking even further. So I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about the state of experimental practice and how the pandemic has affected its kind of efficacy, because I think we all have a kind of longing for our students to be slightly more experimental, but they react like jellyfish, to the market. They'll shrink away, if they feel their futures are being threatened. So I was hoping you could give us good news from the experimental practice field.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thanks, David. I sort of, I think now more than ever, the study of architecture, being a designer, an artist, a theatre director, a creative director is the most important genre or job there is right now. I really believe that, because I think that creativity can pinpoint, disrupt, slice through any discipline, be it the climate crisis, be it politics, be it any kind of discipline. Creativity, I feel like, needs to be in synchronicity with these disciplines. And there is a professor, he's just got a huge grant for breast cancer, to look into breast cancer, and he has a full-time artist working in his laboratory at Columbia University. And for me, that is what should be happening across every discipline. And so I think that as we move forward, that will become more of a familiar and usual scenario. And so whether, you're studying architecture and you become a creative director in a synthetic biology company, I feel like the importance of that is so such a priority. But and then in that spirit, that experimentation is the way of pioneering those new disciplines coming together, because they haven't come together sort of strictly before. So not having a blueprint, not knowing how to do it, you just need to experiment, but you need the person to be on board with that experimentation. So I think there's the mind shift of those who need to welcome in the architect or the artist into the foreign landscape, and then those who are being welcomed in to go in. When I went into Philips, I had no experience. I did not know. I would go home at night and I'd be like, what's pyloric arousal? What's EEG? I went in there not knowing anything, but that served me because I came from a very, very different background.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thanks for joining us. I really loved it. I love the talk.
Yeah, incredible talk.
Thanks,
It reminds me of the Buckminster Fuller quote, "Dare to be naive."
Huh.
You know, which I think the work starts in that from that naive place,
Yeah.
and it's a synthesis that becomes an expertise by the end, which is wonderful to see in the work. And you can see it in the way that you presented it today, that it works.
Make it till you make it. That's been something
Love
that
it.
I've reminded myself of.
There was maybe
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to jump back in. I mean, there are limits, though. I mean, I remember I was at Cooper Union as a student, and I remember like John Haydick basically made this argument that if you experimented enough in a model, you could be a brain surgeon. I was going, no, you can't. I mean, there's actually a limit to that kind of thinking, right? That actually, I mean, I really appreciate the comment, but there's also a kind of strange limit to it, which is that actually, I mean, you need the expertise, but then you also need to be kind of like remarkably humble about what you don't know, right? And I this is kind of strange. There's kind of strange kind of a megalomania about it on the one hand, and that was the world that I grew up in educationally, and I found it really problematic. I mean, intellectually problematic, even though I understood. I mean, I get the concept fundamentally, you know, and I mean, it's like you were saying this is like the most important job. And I have a daughter who's a doctor. I'm going, well, I don't know, you know, like where. I mean, it's a hard thing to.
But in a research context, if there were conversations between architects and doctors around certain, I don't know, the design of something, or
definitely. So, for example, the design of how an operating room operates is really, really fascinating, and there's remarkably interesting kind of work that where someone, I don't know, where people step outside of step into kind of architectural and creative realms in order to reconceive those worlds. I agree. I wasn't actually talking about that. I was just talking about the kind of strange responsibility that comes with that way of thinking, which is that you can step into these other worlds, but you have to be kind of cognizant of the kind of limits of what you know, which is sort of different from how architecture had operated in that particular way many years ago, which I actually appreciate. I mean, I think it's really fascinating that you were at Philips, that you step out and kind of collaborate with so many other experts. I think it's kind of vital. Not a criticism. This is just kind of further commentary on the discussion, you know?
Yeah, I think that knowledge of knowing what you don't know is really the gateway into who you collaborate with, and then that merging of those disciplines, like this is how far I can get, this is where we meet, and it's that point there, that frisson where the magic happens. And the bigger the gap, the more interesting it gets, I think.
I agree.
Yes. There's one, maybe, do you have time for maybe one more question? There was one of the from one of the students in the room. You want to say it, or do you want me to say? Okay. I got it as sort of a note. And so in your past exhibitions, you've discussed using the same discomfort or fear as a jumping off point for projects. At what point during a project do you decide you're comfortable or satisfied with it? Do you ever reach this point, or how do you discern when something is quote unquote done?
Great question. I would say that happens in stages. So to reference the box with the textile that came after all the plastic tests, that night I slept very well. Previous nights I was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. So I think that was a big hurdle, but then from there it's like, okay, now I need to scale this up. What's it going to look like inflated? I think that there is always an anticlimax to seeing the work being shown at the gallery on the opening days. I've also had to learn it's not like, I mean, it's partly amazing, we've done it, we've succeeded, but it's never what you imagine in your mind. So there's sort of that acceptance of it being different to what you had imagined. When is it done? Sometimes it's done 2 years later when I see it randomly, or I haven't seen it for a while, and I appreciate it because I've had the distance from it. When you're looking at something so closely, you're your worst critic. And so through time, you can appreciate what you've made. But I also think in that spirit, I have, I'm sure we all have it here, the perfectionist trait, which is the worst. And so I'm really trying to be more aware of that, because if I'm more aware of that, maybe done comes up more or earlier.
Super interesting. Fantastic. I could also see that the work sort of begets questions that maybe start up new works. I mean, you can see it in your lineage of thinking there. That's where some things are transferred or brought over, or
that's true. I think that
work.
I feel like each project, it's almost like a timeline and an edit, and you have these frames, and something in that previous project wasn't finished, but that's the nugget that you take forward in the next one. So there's that continuity.
Perfect. Well, that brings us, I want to be very aware of your time, Lucy, and that brings us to our hour of wonderful discussion and amazing work and really generous description of your process and thinking, and the hopefully a little glimpse maybe into the future of your project as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Lucy.
Well, we look forward to hosting you in person one day.
Yeah.
We'll
I want to come and see the experimentation.
Yes.